The Dallas Cowboys had their most competitive practice of the year on Saturday. We'll break down the biggest winners on this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports just stop sporting the way we'd like them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. He is back from Oxnard. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, we've got a bunch to talk about today, but I just want to talk about kind of your experience at Oxnard the last week. You saw several practices, including this awesome practice on Saturday that we're going to discuss. How are you feeling about this team in general coming out of the week?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what we kind of anticipated, I saw, so there wasn't a ton of surprise in some stuff, but there certainly was some surprise in some stuff. I think, just to kind of round the horn very quickly, I think the center position has kind of taken a turn in a way that I was surprised, right? I think Brock Hoffman has got that position right now, that competition kind of in a chokehold right now. We'll see. It's early days, and I think BB is still developing very quickly. But that it's not all just about where BB is. It's about where Brock Hoffman is. I think we'll talk a little bit later, but I think the linebacker position is surprisingly in a better spot than I expected. Thanks to some surprise contributors or some surprise kind of re-contributors that have shown up and have taken a step. It feels like in the offseason. I think Tyler Guyton is a big story here that we've been talking about in his emergence. But I think the thing that's kind of maybe the most surprising to me from what we've seen or at least what we were anticipating coming into this situation was the high level of competition at the wide receiver position at spots 3 through 7. And really, honestly, if I'm being honest, the story is probably just the wide receiver play without CeeDee Lamb being here has been very, very high. We have to include Brandon Cooks because he's been outstanding out here, especially on Saturday. Had a big long pass catch early in the 2-minute drill with Dak, and was catching a bunch of short stuff as well, and was basically unguardable. But all throughout the week, and then obviously an exclamation point on Saturday, if we're being honest, a group that has been maligned and kind of hemmed and hawed at, and had a lot of questions about just where they were, has done nothing but kind of have been really, really productive and made big plays throughout the week. And I think that is, even for people that were excited to see this group, I think that's been the biggest surprise for me so far, as far as a group so far this week that I've been out there.
We saw Brandon Cooks have some really good practices. But to me, the story is Jalen Tolbert, right?
Yeah.
We needed to see Jalen Tolbert take a big step this year, right? If this offense was going to be as good as they were last year, they needed Jalen Tolbert to make a leap. And it seems like he's doing that. And even Dak Prescott in one of the post-practice press conferences was talking about how he got a lot of reps in with Jalen Tolbert this offseason and told him, hey, you can be a number one receiver in this league. And again, we'll preface this with 10 days of practice so far, something like that. But it does seem like there's a lot of confidence in Jalen Tolbert, where last year there was some excitement. Now it feels like this is real. This is very, very real.
Yeah, I mean, he's had to be kind of him and Cooks have had to be the kind of steady Eddies, the leaders of this wide receiver core that, without CeeDee Lamb, I mean, how would they hold up against Look, Trayvon Diggs is not out here, admittedly, and there's no Stephon Gilmore, but Jordan Lewis has played outstanding football out here. Deron Bland looks like, again, the real deal at corner. So it's not like there's been no talent out here. And Kalen Carson is another guy we should talk about, has been outstanding. So there has been a lot of really good cornerback play out here. And how would this wide receiver core that, has been quite, I guess rightfully maligned at points without CeeDee Lamb, how would they hold up? And I think we knew Brandon Cooks would show up and be what he is and be a veteran. I thought that maybe even he would look better than he did last year because of the familiarity with Dak Prescott. And I think he has. But I think you're right that the difference is that Jalen Tolbert has kind of stepped in there and been a more than solid number 2 version out here, has been where Dak has needed him at times, has made big plays. And it's even to the point where has bailed out Dak at times when Dak's made some kind of off target throws and he's been able to kind of make the play. And I think that's the trust that he's earned from Dak, right? Dak doesn't feel like he has to throw a perfect ball for Tolbert to go up and get it. But I also think that, again, Tolbert has elevated his game, and that's exciting for the regular season. But I also think it's the rest of these guys too. Jalen Brooks has clearly taken a step. He's been reliable, especially inside, slant catcher. We've seen guys like Durden, who had a really big game, really big practice.
Devontae Turpin.
Scrimmage. Yeah, and Devontae Turpin has not only had a good camp, but you're seeing him used more in a lot of different ways. He had a contested catch touchdown in goal line period where he was running around down the goal line, which is not exactly something I thought I'd ever see. And then obviously, doing stuff out of the backfield. So that's obviously a thing. Flournoy has been in and out here, unfortunately, but the rest of these guys, we finally started to see Cropper kind of show up a little bit on Saturday and made a couple big plays. I think he had 2 touchdowns in practice on Saturday. So, everybody has kind of had their turn at the wide receiver position, it feels like, and has contributed. And that's really exciting to see a lot of competition and not just like a lot of wasted roster spots with guys who don't look like they belong. Everyone here looks like, well versed in the offense because they've most of them have returned since last year and aren't having to kind of, get off on a new foot. They look experienced and they know what they're doing and they're executing. And I think that's the real big thing is that, you can run the route all the way up to the spot where the ball arrives, but can you make the play when the ball arrives? And guys like the down roster guys like Durden and Cropper, they're doing that. And I think that's really exciting for this team.
My biggest concern was that we were going to get to camp and it was like, okay, they need to go sign a veteran. Like that was going to be the consensus coming out of the first 2 weeks of camp is go call Michael Thomas, go call whatever receivers available. They've got to get somebody in here that is a more viable third option. And so far it's been the opposite. It's like, hey, Jalen Tolbert could potentially be the number 2 receiver on this team at some point this year. But having said all of that, it'd be nice to get CeeDee Lamb back in camp soon and see what it looks like with CeeDee.
I cannot believe that I did that whole segment and I didn't even talk about the guy who I liked the most at camp this whole week. And I mean that the most. And that's Uncle Baby Billy Johnson. And that's what I'm going to keep calling him until they tell me not to. Tyron Billy Johnson, has been a revelation out here. He is, again, I'll reiterate that somehow this guy is the guy with the 3rd most receiving yards on this team currently in the roster. Yeah. So, and he has been out here showing incredible speed, versatility in the middle of the field as well. He's a guy that, wasn't even really truly on the radar very much. We talked about him as a potential breakout guy, but I think the ceiling we even talked about was, maybe practice squad. And I think that's still, a likely thing here. But honestly, if he continues the trajectory that he's at, I would not be shocked if he made the roster because he's just been, steady. And he's making flash plays on a regular basis, and he's doing it with the ones at times. So, just too many names for me to keep track of. Clearly, and a lot of great players, and obviously, kind of extinguishing that need of keeping an eye on the street free agents. You don't have enough reps for anybody else at this point because you like what you've seen from all the guys that you're throwing out there.
All right, so Landon, there's always a player or two that have outstanding practices right in a row, like early on in camp, before we even get to August. There's been one player that the drum beat couldn't be louder right now coming out of Cowboys camp. Let's discuss Damone Clark next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip the gym or you never skip golf when the weather's nice like me. When your schedule is packed with kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even when we know what makes us happy, it's sometimes hard to make time for it. But when you feel like you have no time for yourself, non-negotiables like therapy are more important than ever. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. Landon, are you listening? Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I know Landon cares so much about fantasy. He's the one football host here on the Locked On Podcast Network that doesn't play fantasy. At some point, we're going to convince you to do this, right?
You're living in a fantasy.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Okay. Let's talk about Deone Clark, because if I before going into camp, if I would have put together a list of 10 players that I think are going to surprise people in camp, I don't think Deone Clark would have been one of the names on that list. But it sounds like he is having a heck of a camp. What did you see?
Yeah, I think I'm seeing what everybody else is seeing, is that he's just tearing it up, specifically in run plays and run defense drills. He just looks like a guy that it's clicked for, and I guess it shouldn't surprise us too much. I mean, because the truth of the matter is that we really thought highly of him going into the season last year, and I think the issue with him is that they pushed him up so much, and then everything kind of fell apart all around him, right? You lose LVE, you kind of have to transition to this situation where you're playing more safeties at linebacker, and suddenly Damone Clark looks around in December, and he's the only legitimate linebacker playing in that core, basically. Yep. And so it was a very difficult situation for a guy who was still a very, very young player. Hadn't seen a ton in the NFL. He clearly has gotten a lot of starts now for being such a young linebacker, but it's a lot, and putting it a lot on his shoulders. And he's a young man that he wore 18 at LSU, and if anybody knows anything about LSU football history, that's a big deal. And he's that type of kind of mentality and leader and hard worker that earns that kind of spot. But I still think that was a lot for anybody. And so now you fast forward to right where we are now, right? And they've drafted another linebacker. They've brought in a Kendricks, and a guy who's a former All-Pro, is very experienced in this defense. Now Micah's also getting some snaps, and I know that may feel like, if you're thinking about competition and then everything kind of closing in, but for Damone Clark, it may feel like, okay, now I'm actually able to kind of operate within myself a little bit. I'm not being overstretched. I'm kind of in a role where I feel comfortable. And basically, and I think a lot of what we've discussed with Mozzie and some of the defensive tackles and the way that they're playing this defense has just opened things up a lot more for these linebackers. And for Damone Clark, that kind of confluence of all those things has kind of come together for him this season. And he spent the offseason, apparently, according to, was it Dallas Morning News wrote an article about him still speaking with LVE, still reaching out to now Sean Lee and having Sean Lee evaluate his tape and giving him notes. And I think all of that has kind of, come together at a head where we are now in camp, where he just looks incredible. He looks comfortable. He knows exactly what he's supposed to be doing. And what that's allowing is a guy who, if I remember correctly, was one of the fastest players, if not the fastest player on GPS and pads during practice last year, faster than even Parsons, to play fast again. And now he's getting to the ball quickly. You see him screaming across the line of scrimmage to make tackles. And when you get a guy like that playing confident, especially in a defense like this that is going to put him in positions to, blitz the A gap and kind of run with a purpose, which is something that we've talked about before, right? With him is having a purpose helps Damone Clark, play on a snap basis. I think it's just all coming together for him in a way that has really, really played out beautifully. Kendrick's had a tightness in his back. He's had an opportunity to kind of step up even more and play some more snaps. And you put him next to Overshown, and it's been dynamite. Both of them have been dynamite, and like together, especially. And I that's what's really exciting, is to see the two of them with that kind of speed play next to each other.
So what if this is real, Lana? Like, what if this awesome play through 2 weeks of training camp continues for the next month? What did the Cowboys do at linebacker? Because they signed Eric Kendricks to be their starting middle linebacker, right? He took less money to go from San Fran, where he kind of initially agreed to a deal, to come to Dallas because of the opportunity to play snaps. Sure. I would think Overshown is going to be your starting will linebacker almost regardless of anything, just because he's really the only guy that has kind of that quickness and speed. What do they do with Deone Clark?
They don't. There's plenty of snaps to go around. We have to remember that this is going to be a defense that's going to be playing a lot more 3 linebacker than they have been previously. So
all right, well, let me ask you like this. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's 3rd and 5. Who are your 2 linebackers in week 1 against Cleveland? Who are your 2 linebackers on the field? I mean,
that's the thing, is that I can feel comfortable about having any 2 of those 3. Right. But you don't have to, that's, I'm okay with having champagne luxury problems of having too many linebackers to play on the field. I don't know what that feels like, Marcus. So I'm sure it feels very, very nice. So I think, but that's the other thing too, is that if it's 3rd and 5, it's not always guaranteed that you're only going to have 2 linebackers on the field. You know what I'm saying? Like there will be more situations, passing situations, where you're going to see 3 linebackers on the field. So, I think that, there's going to be plenty of opportunity. The problem right now for the linebacker spot is not too many snaps. There's only 4 linebackers that I feel super comfortable about deploying right now. There may be more, but I think right now there's 4 of them that I feel comfy with. And I think,
not including Micah Parsons, by the way, right?
No, not including Parsons. I think Parsons playing linebacker is still a part-time proposition. It's not like I wouldn't count him in the linebacker count as far as roster building situation. So there's 4 other linebackers out, not including Parsons, that I feel comfortable that are going to make the team and that are going to play. And I think that that's a good number of linebackers to have in a rotation, especially when you're going to play a lot of 3 linebackers, formations.
Have any of the other linebackers down roster stood out to you, whether it's Willie Harvey or Tyrus Wheat? Like, is any of those guys like...
Wheat is purely a defensive lineman at this point. Okay. I mean, they've had him only working as a pass rusher. It's been up and down, it feels like, with him there. What's the UFL? What's the UFL?
Willie Harvey.
Willie Harvey has definitely shown up at different points. He's, especially once the pads came on, it started to feel like he looked a lot more comfortable. I think he had an interception in the first day of padded practice, if I remember correctly. I think Harvey has shown you a little bit. There's another guy that people were talking about. I'm sorry, I actually have the roster right here. Brock Mogensen. I didn't really notice him, but he's the South. Mogensen, is that his name?
Sure.
From South Dakota. Apparently, he kind of there's a little bit of a whisper about him that he's a guy to watch for practice squad, that sort of guy. But he's really been showing out here. And then Jason Johnson, the Central Florida kid. I noticed him a couple different times.
He was one of their big money UDFAs that they signed this offseason.
Yeah, that third, I think this is probably the third linebacker crew. They've been okay as well. They've been making some plays, and especially early on when the offense was still kind of finding its footing. Those are the guys who were wrecking practice for the third team offense.
Yeah, linebacker's a spot that I'm really interested to see in the preseason, because once you have live tackling, you really find out about these linebackers. And once you actually have to take on guards, we're gonna get a good idea where these linebackers are at.
Whenever there's touch up, it's always funny to hear the offense and defense argue whether or not what was a tackle and what was not a tackle.
That's why there's no substitute for live
exactly.
tackling.
It's good to see live tackling for sure.
I want to talk about practice in general on Saturday because it sounds like it was a very competitive practice. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Listen, I love sports. I love them so much that I never want them to stop. There is nothing better in the entire world than sitting on my couch and turning on a game at the end of a long day. But unfortunately, with the playoffs now over in the NBA and in the NHL, the sports just aren't sporting the way that I'd like them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime that I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Every day on Tuesday's show, we're going to break down Monday's practice. We're going to be a little bit, 12 hours behind. So bear with us, getting you ready for the Cowboys' first preseason game of the year against the Rams. I believe they have joint practices with the Rams this week.
On Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
We're going to learn a lot about this team over the next week or so.
Yeah,
so make sure you're downloading the Locked On Cowboys podcast. But Lena, let's talk about the Saturday practice that you attended. From all the reports, it sounds like this was a very, very competitive practice.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things, that we talked about with like good practices, like the hallmark of a good padded practice is that, especially when you're rooting for both sides of the ball, right? Is that you don't want to see like guys running wide open. You don't want to see missed tackles. I mean, it's tough with touch up, but you can tell, right? Like whether a guy had a good angle or not. You don't want to see, you want to see competition on both sides. You want to see physical practice. And you want to see ultimately, and this is kind of what we saw, a lot of contested catch completions, right? Like you want to see the offense making the completion and wide receivers fighting through what is very difficult and very good sticky coverage, right? Because obviously sometimes you're not going to get it and sometimes they do get it. But if you're seeing kind of a situation where every pass is being, competed for, and the defensive back is there and he's got a hand in the basket and the wide receiver is still able to reel it in or he's not, like that is what, ultimately you're seeing a balanced team with that is, understanding what's their assignment is, obviously executing at a high level. And ultimately it's coming down to execution at the moment, right? That's a good sign of at least where this team is in its installation of the offense and defense, right? Where they're both executing at a high level. Usually the kind of, way it plays out, and we've talked about this a lot, right? Is the offense is a little bit behind the defense, right? Trying to still kind of get used to the getting back into the timing of running the offense now that you've added physicality into the time kind of timing, element of it. Now they're in 3 or 4 padded practices in. They're into that rhythm a lot more. They remember how to play football again. Yep. And now you're seeing like it's competitive. One side's taking it to the other side and the other side's punching back. And, there was a very competitive period that they just call move the ball, right? And they play this really kind of interesting game where every drive counts for 7 points, right? And if you get if the offense gets the touchdown, the offense gets 7 points. If they get nothing, the defense gets 7 points. If they kick a field goal, the defense gets 4 points and the offense gets 3 points. And it's basically first to 18. And man, they were just going back and forth, and it was like defense would make a play, and then suddenly there was this great play where the defense made 2 plays in a row, and Micah Parsons was like riling up the crowd, and the crowd was chanting defense, and Dak got up there cold as ice and threw a strike to the end zone and scored a touchdown. I can't remember. I think it was to Tolbert in the corner. And just like, and now suddenly he's like, he's trying to cheer up and get the offense like, oh, what happened, everybody? So it's just like, love seeing like the back and forth that that the competition, kind of brings out, but also that it's not like guys fumbling around or running the wrong route or having, not them having to blow plays dead and like restart the play or whatever.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
it was good to see a competitive, well executed practice.
There are two things that I watch for when I go to any practice, whether it's high school, college, or the NFL, right? It's, first of all, penalties. Like there's different types of penalties. Like I can live with a corner being too aggressive, right? But pre-snap penalties. Do you have guys false starting and jumping off sides? Like nothing drains the energy of a practice faster than pre-snap penalties. The other one is just the overall energy level. And you can tell, you can tell when players are just going through the motions, and you can tell when players are competitive and they're competing, and there is a different vibe in those practices. And I think those are the types of practices that make you better. And Lena, you've been in sports your whole life, and most people that are listening to this podcast have played a competitive sport before. Those type of practices where it feels like a game, that's how you get better. And it sounds like this was one of those type of practices.
Yeah, I mean, like the players themselves talk about it, right? Like the levels of speed and energy, right? Like there's practice, and then there's preseason game, and there's regular season game, and the ultimate goal is to try to practice at the energy of a regular season game, and it's because you have to get used for that. You have to get used to playing at that speed with that juice because it's there, and you're going to be a part of it. So you got to know how to handle it, and I think, like the defense kind of comes out and they thrive on it, right? And I think
definitely even more than the offense, for sure.
Yeah, and I think at times like the offense, like they take it, it's sort of, the offense is very much in the vein of Dak Prescott, right? Where it almost wants to take a punch, right? Like, and then now you woke up the monster, and now here it comes, and Dak answers. So it felt very much like that in practice, where the energy was high, everybody was having fun. Micah Parsons, body slamming Trayvon Diggs on the sideline. Everyone was having a good time.
You know which player that reminds me the most of is Brett Favre. Used to be a little bit that way, where Favre would try to like to get a little banged up early in the game, and that would kind of settle him down a little bit. I think Dak certainly has some of that to his game, and this is why we were advocating for him to run more early in these games.
Yeah, absolutely.
And get some contact, settle yourself down, because I think one thing that Dak tends to do is he tends to amp himself up a little bit too much. I'm hoping this year, going into year 9, he can kind of control that a little bit. But I think there's always going to be part of him that's like that, where he needs the physicalness of the game to kind of slow him down a little bit.
He needs the juice, like he needs to be reminded that he loves the competition in that sense, right? Yeah. Like you can see it in practice. He loves getting in his teammates' face.
Oh yeah.
He loves talking trash. I haven't seen a quarterback like that really as much. That's like as in your face as like the worst defensive back. I mean, it's like him, I remember him and Trayvon Diggs last year just going at each other face to face. And it's so funny to see, because it's like, that's not usually the quarterback that's doing that. But I love that. And I think that his teammates love that about him. And that's why it makes him an easy leader to follow.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen of the day. Now go listen to the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy football draft strategies so that you can go out and win your league this season. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure that you're downloading the Locked On Cowboys podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. You can check us out on YouTube as well. Go follow Landon on Twitter @McCoolBCB. I'm @Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here on Tuesday.